A series of recent crises linked to the rollout of AI systems have made ethics a major consideration for technology organizations. In response, many organizations have put out guidelines reaffirming their commitment to principles like transparency, justice, and fairness. Large tech companies have hired ethics owners to oversee the development of projects, and a variety of interventions like checklists and fairness toolkits have been introduced in order to make it technically easier to build ethical products. However, recent literature demonstrates that these practices have their own set of blind spots. Guidelines have not stopped organizations from carrying out projects that blatantly violate those guidelines and in some cases only exist in order to get ahead of future regulations. Ethics owners are often constrained by institutional interests and can be let go whenever their recommendations are seriously at odds with those interests. And interventions intended to maximize system fairness or accountability may impose too narrow a scope of scrutiny and thus fail to disclose wider ethical concerns. Clearly, the onus to make products and services ethical cannot fall solely on organizations that offer them. External enforcement through legislation is one avenue of forcing compliance. Another avenue of instigating change is from within the organization itself. Employee activism and major tech firms have succeeded in shutting down ethically suspect projects and altering business practices. And there is increasing research on soft resistance, steps taken by tech workers to incorporate personal values into their work. Following this line of inquiry, our work attempts to better understand how individual tech practitioners identify and address ethical issues that arise over the course of their work. We approach this topic with three research questions. 1. What are practitioners' ethical concerns? 2. What happens when they develop ethical concerns? And 3. What affects their power to resolve their concerns? To answer these questions, we surveyed 115 tech practitioners with self-identified ethical concerns who we recruited through Twitter, Reddit, Stack Overflow, messaging channels, and at an in-person developer meetup. All participants filled out an open-ended survey asking if they have ever had ethical concerns with the software system they were asked to contribute to, the actions they took, resolutions, and factors which made raising concerns harder or easier. 21 respondents agreed to participate in a semi-structured follow-up interview, which lasted an average of 41 minutes. We then conducted 3 rounds of iterative thematic analysis on the survey and interview data. Almost all of our 115 participants were employed full-time, with even representation across firm sizes. Respondents were relatively experienced, reporting a mean of 17 years of experience in tech. Respondents spanned 6 continents, although most participants were from North America or Europe. 80 participants identified as male, 10 as female, 6 as non-binary or non-conforming, 5 self-described, and 14 preferred not to answer. Importantly, our sample is not representative of software practitioners as a whole. Our open-ended recruitment strategy makes use of self-selection in order to reach practitioners who are passionately invested in tech ethics. Our study asks, assuming a practitioner identifies a concern, how might they go about addressing it? We answered our first research question, what are software practitioners' ethical concerns, in 2 ways. First, by categorizing the kinds of harms that were reported, largely under pre-existing labels. For most of the least frequent, these were military, privacy, advertising, surveillance, environmental impact, labor displacement, inequality, and others. However, we also developed an alternate way of sorting concerns according to scope, or how much the organization's goals or priorities any given concern calls into question. We identified the following 4 overlapping categories to describe scope. First, bugs, which are concerns arising from the unintentional behavior from a product. 2, features, which are intentional but non-essential aspects of a product. 3, product, which are concerns arising from the product itself. And 4, organizations, concerns pertaining to the practitioner's entire organization or industry. Focusing on the scope of a concern over the specific type of harm incurred helped us better understand how much agency practitioners felt. The more organizational incentives a concern calls into question, the more resistance a practitioner is likely to face. This leads into our second research question. What happens when software practitioners develop concerns about their work? Addressing concerns about bugs or features, some practitioners proposed fixing the bug or altering the implementation of a feature. For example, in response to being asked to add a location tracking feature to a workplace accountability app, one participant proposed geofencing the tracking within a certain perimeter. Although technical solutions fall closest to a practitioner's prescribed responsibilities, even these solutions are occasionally rejected due to resource constraints or other competing organizational interests. When butting heads with these interests, Some practitioners sought to negotiate by appealing to organizational incentives. For example, one ML researcher concerned about his project's use of facial identification reported successfully pivoting the direction of his project by couching his concerns within more practical concerns about achievability or resource constraints. When practitioners felt little agency in working within the organizations, they sometimes refused to work on the project altogether. Refusal took various forms, including minimizing productivity, asking to be reassigned to another project, delivering ultimatums to management, or resigning from their post. On the flip side, practitioners also talked about feat voting, proactively seeking out employment at organizations that are more closely aligned with their values. This includes turning down lucrative job offers to work on projects they found unacceptable, vetting employers during the interview process, or even physically moving to pursue different opportunities. Finally, some participants suggested leveraging legal systems. This includes reporting illegal activities at their organizations, politically supporting legislation that would apply pressure to firms, or in the case of open source software, carefully choosing copyleft licenses that might potentially prevent its abuse. Almost all the participants we spoke to indicated that raising ethical concerns was stressful, with some reporting severe bouts of anxiety and depression after identifying ethical concerns with their work. Besides the psychological toll of raising concerns, three key factors limited practitioners' agency. First is their financial and immigration situation. Tech workers with dependents, medical conditions, or little experience found it difficult to take risky actions that could potentially compromise their employment. On the flip side, participants with significant savings, strong support networks, or good job prospects found it much easier to raise their concerns. Similarly, practitioners who were on employment visas described needing to line up a new opportunity before taking any actions. The second key factor limiting agency was workplace culture. Many practitioners recounted that openness and shared values made raising concerns easier, while hierarchical or indifferent management could suffocate conversations around ethics. Some participants reported that maintaining a distant professional relationship with management actually made raising concerns easier. Finally, organizational incentives affected how practitioners acted on ethical concerns. For instance, employees at for-profit firms often felt they needed to frame ethical initiatives in terms of long-term financial incentives in order to gain support. On the flip side, practitioners at nonprofit firms and government organizations described pursuing goods beyond profit that made it easier to raise concerns. Still, one participant reflected on how nonprofits were beholden to donors with their own geopolitical agendas and so came with its own constraints. Our research demonstrates that highly paid, relatively powerful tech practitioners still face significant barriers to acting on their ethical concerns. Having technical know-how and insider status, practitioners are well positioned to identify concerns in their work. But even in the best-case scenario, they are mostly constrained to addressing these concerns through technical or design stage interventions. Any further change depends on their ability to legitimize their concerns to colleagues and management. The implications for education are clear. Tech ethics courses for prospective tech workers should teach students how to communicate ethical issues as well as identify them. The vast majority of reported concerns could not be addressed through technical or design stage interventions, but instead related to systemic harms posed by the product's intended use case. Without the power to directly affect business decisions, practitioners saw few options other than withholding their labor, which often had a greater impact on the project than they imagined. Future research could investigate just how much power individual practitioners wield over their projects, as well as how tech workers could amass more power in the workplace through coalition building. Finally, most of the practitioners we spoke to did not work at big tech firms. Many were consultants or in-house engineers at non-technical firms who reported concerns outside the well-studied harms like bias or accountability. We argue that a focus on AI in tech ethics discourse implies a limited scope of scrutiny that focuses on design stage interventions, foreclosing concerns about how that tech is used or monetized. Therefore, we suggest that AI ethics research may need to broaden to better account for the majority of software practitioners who do not work at major companies. By surveying and interviewing software practitioners with self-identified concerns, we uncovered a host of tactics used by practitioners to mitigate perceived harms in the software they build. Moreover, we proposed a new frame of analysis for concerns focusing on scope, which helps inform which tactics might be effective. Finally, we found a set of limiting factors including precarity, culture, and incentive structures, which further constrain practitioner agency. Our work demonstrates concretely that power matters in resolving the majority of ethical concerns and calls for future work to more closely examine the extent and potential of practitioners' power in the workplace.